Dr. Demeter here. I'm going to give a short lecture today about design because I use that term a lot, and it's good to get a bit of an understanding around what design is, because it's one of the most important things we can do in these times of uncertainty is to redesign. So designing is a beautiful discipline that has an intuitive aspect to it. It allows us to flex our organ of imagination. And that's not necessarily something that is drilled into design students inside design schools. I actually came across that idea through Rudolf Steiner, who was the founder of anthroposophy in the late 1800s, early 1900s. So the organ of imagination gives us an ability to reimagine futures. But today I'm going to be talking about actually the history of design and the patterns of the past that allow us to be designers of the future. So these 5 points are what I'm going to focus on today, and let's begin here with humans. Humans have been designing since the beginning of when we were human, through language, through tools that we ate with, that we built shelter with, and throughout time, humans have always designed and used our organ of imagination in many different ways. And the deeper I've looked into human history is the profound wisdom and intuition that humans were in touch with in everyday life. And I'll get into more of that as we dive into practices like biodynamics and share with you those more intricate details around what humans were doing thousands of years ago. The next section I'm going to be focusing on now is history and herstories. So even in the language itself, history, his, one story, one, homogeneous. It's a narrative. It's usually in a history book. A lot of the time we're reading a very narrow, sometimes unfortunately Eurocentric perspective of one dude. And I'm really interested, and got into trouble in my PhD, by the way, and if one day one of the people that was sitting around that table who tried to kick me out for proclaiming that Patanjali, the yogi from India, should be one of my theories that I draw on. I stand by I did get through my PhD, so they let me do it, but that was a really difficult meeting. And I stand by it. I actually was not keen to refer, I love Lefebvre, the French philosopher, the critique of everyday life, and I had him in there. But I had Patanjali, I had Aboriginal psychologists, Aboriginal Australian psychologists, I had Ivan Illich, I had many, Helena Norberg-Hodge, Joanna Macy. I wove a tapestry of theories and views together, and of course Fritjof Capra's living systems design and Miller's life systems design theories. They were all interwoven stories of what was informing Con Viv. Con Viv was not going to be born out of one Eurocentric white dude's theory on the critique of everyday life. It was not possible, to say that in the French way. And so this is my point. history or her stories. And so let's look at design over time. How have human beings been living over time and designing? And a lot of, when we start to look at patterns of the way in which humans have interacted with the material world, patterns is a beautiful way to see things. We don't need to, I'm not encouraging you to go and read 65,000 years of history and how humans have been over time. But if you start to do some research in how people were over time, we start to see patterns, which are very, let's say, making me feel, certainly when I was exploring these ideas, more certain about what the future can look like in terms of the proposals I wanted to put forward for Con Viv. And that's because human beings have always been in community. They've always been connected to the land and their food systems in many, many different times over history or her stories. And so we start to see these patterns. And then modernity came about and industrialization, and things shifted. People started to move into cities, and they became what Ivan Illich describes as professional elites. So they no longer grew their own food, and they became disconnected from growing, and they started to go to supermarkets. And this is a very recent situation. So let's look at how people were living over thousands of years. And I want to point you in two different directions for purpose of diving into some really juicy areas of history. Firstly, I really encourage you to read the First Knowledges series, which came out of the National Gallery of Australia's exhibitions on Aboriginal Australia. And there are 6 or 7 books in that series on plants, on design of shelter, but design in general, where Alison Page discusses a new Australian design. And there's astronomy, law in there, fire, and innovation is another one, and there's another one. But the point is, this is 65,000 years or more of living and with the material world, a culture that had this continuous culture connected to the land and what they were designing. The next readings I really encourage you to look at is Rudolf Steiner's histories, the epochs of ancient India, of Babylon, Rome, Greece, and really dive into his epochs. And then you'll start to be a bit of a weaver of these patterns. You'll start to see patterns of how people were relating over time. And it builds up a strong base to come to why we need to be designing from a life systems perspective, and why we need to be aligned with life in terms of the way we're governing, the way we're living, the way we're designing policy, the whole gamut. And that is where I go back to the first lecture in my book, Con Viv, where we talk about the self. And the self is we're a perception organ, and we must become really well read around how humans were in the past for us to understand how we are to be in the future. And so I highly encourage you to check my book out, which is on the Living Earth College website. You can get an ebook, or I can send you a signed copy. But I also highly recommend you, just delve into these histories that I have just suggested, and get in touch with me. join one of my courses of activating local food systems or the regenerative farming course for us to bring in more of this dialogue and sharings. So these patterns over time emerged of how people were relating to life. And we were very connected to food systems. We were very connected to our built shelters. And right now, we see a massive commodification of everyday life where everything has become sold back to us. And this has not always been this way. And Ivan Illich describes this as professional elites pretty much selling us back services, and we become less capable with our heart, head, and hands. And this is a dangerous thing. So it's really important to start to flex our organ of imagination and start to discover ways that we can get in touch with our own hands and heart and head, and look at how everything from the policy to the economy to agriculture to community life to our relationships in everyday life, and that includes with ourselves, are impacted through this system that we have been born into. And there's a design theorist who says design designs. This is Tony Fry, I believe, the theorist. Design designs. So now we need to redesign, and that's why it takes a lot of courage coming from us as a designer of everyday life to overcome all of this and navigate this designed system. I'll give you an example: supermarkets. This is such a designed system, and how we undesign ourselves from that system, big question. Because particularly when we look at somewhere like Magical Farm, which is a living laboratory for everyday life design, for life design, there's challenges. I'm surprised even, and I'm going to surprise you in the coming months. I'm not allowed to grow food on this farm according to the local council. So there's professional elites at the local council, and you know what? It's not actually even them, but there's a planning code, but they're operating within that system and basically telling my family that we're not allowed to sell food to the public. On top of that, we have Biosecurity Tasmania saying you have to do a 30-page management plan if you're going to take lettuces to a crop swap. That's a proposed policy which has come out on the industrial conveyor belt. So if we're not kind of, I think Tasmania is a fascinating place because we are in a small enough island to see, to feel the pulse of all of these things that are starting to rupture and not make sense. And there's a very interesting case here. It's unpleasant that this is happening to my family and that's happening to small growers, but let's talk about it. And let's talk about how it doesn't make sense. Let's talk about it from human perspective. We've not been living in this way for very long. So let's get back to basics. Let's start to get real and really align policies with life where the patterns start to shift away from this mechanistic form of design to ones which are more life-sustaining design. And so this is where we get to life design and Con Viv, because it's the future is in designing with life again. We just need to remember, and that's an embodied heart, head, hands process. But we need to remember with our heart, our head, and our hands how to live with life once more. So it's not a new concept. Con Viv with life is as ancient concept as it is, since we started to design with life from the beginning, is Con Viv. And if you enjoyed this lecture, please share it. Please, I have to get better at this, like and subscribe, because this is a movement. Con Viv is a movement of claiming back everyday life on this journey. And it's really important for me to share this. This cob house is actually, the council wants to pull it down. It's absolutely ancient architecture, but it was an experimental build. It's a tiny build, but it wasn't on planning. We tried to put it as retrospective, and it's unfortunately, and it's the most beautiful little space. I'll show you. Look at this, and I built it with expert natural builders in Tasmania. But unfortunately, because of the building codes and plans, an ancient form of architecture is not in the building code of Australia, and actually all across the world it's not. So design from even this room's perspective is under threat, because a Con Viv design doesn't fit the planning code, which would require people to pretty much shop at where, Barney's Warehouse, as opposed to digging a hole like I did outside, collected clay, built it with my children, and it's really good for your hands. It's a detox. And my friends, mainly a lot of girlfriends. There you go. That's the end of the lecture, but it's juicy, it's interesting. We have to be courageous. I think it's really good to share about these matters and how we can most urgently start to design with life. Con Viv, everybody.